Good afternoon. Welcome to our Armenian Museum. My name is Maggie Goshen. We're very honored to have distinguished guest, Dr. Anna Aleksanyan, who will be enlightening us about a chapter in our history, especially focusing on the Armenian women during the genocide in the Trabzon area. Today's event was in person. Hopefully we will videotape it and then eventually it will be available for on YouTube on our Armenian Museum channel. We're also delighted to have Dr. Robina Pirumbia, Professor Akçam, who will be introducing our scholar, Dr. Anna Aleksanyan. Today's event is collaborated with the Promise Armenian Institute with the Genocide Research Program under the leadership of Professor Akçam, as well as National Association for Armenian Studies. This is the month of April, it's 110th anniversary. I know we have many events taking place around the community. For me, it's a special day because for me, it's April 24th every time I walk into the museum, because every single item in this museum has been rescued from the genocide and finally has made it to the final destination in the museum. I also want to remind you that we have upcoming events. Next week, I have flyers outside for those of you who would like to either check our website, our Armenian Museum, NASA website, or the Promise Armenian Institute website. And there's several events next week. Next Monday, we have a webinar with Professor Akçam. It's a webinar only. There is on the 21st, Dr. Melissa Bilal, who is here today, and she'll be talking about Yesayan, who was a pillar of Armenian, rescuing Armenian from pre-genocide to post-genocide. And as well as on the 25th of April, Dr. Sebo Aslanyan from the Vadesyan Department of Armenian Studies will be talking about Catholicos, exiled Catholicos Sahab Kabayan, that is present day in Lebanon, Antilias Catholicos. And the speaker will be Dr. Pedros Nerbatosian. With no further ado, I would like to invite Professor Akçam to introduce our speaker for the day. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. It is really a great pleasure, Anna, to introduce you today. Anna Aleksanyan earned her PhD from the Strasser Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University, where I was holding the Kalutzian Mugar Chair at Clark University. Her research focused on gender aspect of the Armenian genocide, particularly the experience of victimized females between 1914 and 18. Before pursuing her doctoral studies, she worked for 7 years as a senior research fellow and head of the source studies of the Armenian Genocide Department at the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute. Aleksanyan received her BA and MA in history from Yerevan State University. From fall 2019 to fall 2022, she served as an adjunct lecturer at American University of Armenia. She is currently a postdoctoral fellow with the Armenian Genocide Research Program at the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA. One more personal note. I would like to add a few words about Anna. During our years working together at Clark University, I came to deeply appreciate both her dedication and her extensive knowledge. She is like a walking bibliothèque, library. I mean, you can ask any question about Armenian history and the sources, you will get an answer from her. She played a central role at Clark in cataloging the Grigor-Gergerian archive, an immense and foundational task. She is now continuing this important work by leading the cataloging of the Vahakandadrian archive as part of our program and our Eskijan Museum's major program. Scholars like Anna deserve our full support and recognition. Please join me in warmly welcoming Anna.
Thank you, Professor, for this introduction. And I have to start thanking all of you for coming today, this afternoon. to spend this time with me and to listen to my research. But before I start, I want to thank Professor Akçam for working with me for these last 11 years. I want to thank Maggie Gocin for giving me this opportunity and this podium to share my research. And of course, this is 110th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, and I want to dedicate this research to all the victims of the Armenian Genocide, but particularly Armenian female victims of the Armenian Genocide who suffered immensely. So today I'm going to focus on the genocide of Armenians in Trabzon. You probably know that each region in the Ottoman Empire, each Armenian community of different regions, let's say, of the Ottoman Empire, had their unique experience of the Armenian genocide. And Trabzon Armenian genocide also was unique, and it was different from other regions' genocides that took place. And today I'm going to open this uniqueness. But I will start with sources. So what are the sources of the Armenian genocide of Trabzon Armenians? We have tremendous amount of sources, primary sources and the secondary sources. Primary sources we can find everywhere, but most importantly, when it comes to Trabzon Armenians, the important portion of sources are held in Tbilisi, in Yerevan, and it has its own reasons. And the other part of the primary sources is held in the Jerusalem Armenian Archives, because there was a committee established to gather the information of the sources after the genocide. And we should not forget that after the war, there was a court-martial on Trabzon trial, let's say, on perpetrators of Trabzon genocide. And all the perpetrators were brought to the court, and they had to they were victims who would come and testify, and they were witnesses who would come to testify. And we have this archive as well, and Professor Akçam with Professor Dadrian, they published all the records of Trabzon Armenian trials. And also there were representatives of Armenian Catholic state who would constantly go to those trials. They would make their notes. There were representatives from Turkish press who would go there and make their notes. And this was something that was published daily in the Armenian newspapers, in the Turkish newspapers, and of course the verdict of these perpetrators was published also in the official newspaper Takvimi Bekai that most of you are familiar with. So sources are everywhere, as I have mentioned, and I want to mention that a huge portion of Trabzon Armenian genocide sources are held here in this building within the Vagan Dadrian archive, because he was one of the first scholars who would study how Armenian women and children became victims of medical experiments in Trabzon in the Red Crescent Hospital by Turkish perpetrators, but Turkish doctors. And he published, of course, an article about it, but most of what he gathered is still held in his archive and needs to be studied. So we have also women who would start publishing their accounts of survival as early as 1916 and 1917 and 1918, of course, Russian and Caucasian Armenian newspapers are full of those accounts of Armenian survivors of Trabzon, because people wanted to share their stories of survival. And those who survived, of course, understood the importance of these accounts. So, for example, many of you know that Aleksanyan was publishing accounts in 1917. She was publishing the genocide survivor accounts in the Armenian Amsagir Gords in Baku. In that very Amsagir, another Armenian went to the orphanages interviewing survived Armenian orphans, including Armenian orphans from Trabzon, and he gives this note about his so-called oral history gathering of these atrocities, saying, "I don't want any adult to give their accounts because I want children to speak. They would not lie, they would not exaggerate. They tell what they went through. And I am here just passing you the information, how it happened and what happened to these orphans." But when he refers to orphans, we see young Armenian women, 13, 14 years old, who were, of course, raped, who were held in the Muslim households as sex slaves or as wives, and then they were rescued, and they would give details of their survival in those testimonies. And here, just an example of a diary. I took it from the Armenian, the Charents Museum Institute archives. It's in Yerevan. It has a rich collection, and it has also a huge collection of Hovagim Hovagimyan, who was an author of, let's say, Trabzon Armenian Hushamadyan. As you all know, every Armenian community published its Hushamadyan, trying to keep the memory of their homeland that they lost, and also how they went through genocide or how they survived. And so Hovagim Hovagimyan was a person to do that for Trabzon Armenians. Պատմություն Հայ Պոնտոսի is the book, and of course he couldn't publish everything, and I don't know why, but he chose not to publish many stories of women survivors, which had a graphic description of sexual violence that they went through. So when I went back to that archive, and you can see how beautiful handwriting it is, I found at least 5 or 7 diaries, and even like accounts of day-to-day survival of these women who went through what I'm going to tell you, who went through all this. So this is about the sources, primary sources, and the secondary sources. And if you will have more questions, we can discuss it after this lecture. So this is the picture, like postcard, that I took from hushamadyan.org, and I want to thank Hushamadyan and Vahet Hashtam personally for providing and allowing me to use these pictures, these postcards for this presentation. So today's lecture is going to be focused only on Armenians who lived in the city of Trabzon. Because when we say Trabzon, it's the vilayet of Trabzon, which is huge. There were Armenian villages. It includes also Hamshensi Armenians, but I just want to make clear that I'm focusing in this lecture only on Armenians who lived in the city of Trabzon. And this is the picture that you see. It's a part of the city of Trabzon. And of course, it's not a secret that Armenians were well-established, wealthy, middle-class or high-class merchants. They would be very well connected to the European representative of the city, who had their ambassadors and representatives, of course, in the city. And also, geographically, if you look into this, the Trabzon Vilayet, it's very close. I mean, the Black Sea, it is within the border of Russian Empire, which is very important. All Russian Armenians would come, almost all of them would come to Ottoman Empire, crossing that road and going through Trabzon. So this is why this crucial movement made Trabzon Armenians very important for entire Armenians of the empire, because when you read the accounts of those survivors, particularly those who were involved in revolutionary movements, of course even the weapons they were transferring from the Caucasian Armenia, from Russian Empire, it was going through Trabzon. So Armenians knew it, and of course Turks knew it. And it is not coincident that this city and the Armenian community in Trabzon was, let's say, very well watched. And but again, the experiences of Trabzon Armenians I divide into three parts. Those who were deported and were killed in their way to the concentration camps to Syria, those who stayed in a city because they were allowed to stay in a city, and those who resisted and went to the mountains hiding and fighting and waiting until 1916 when the Russian army came and took the Trabzon so they would be freed. So three different experiences of Trabzon Armenian of genocide, let's say, genocide years. So I will start with those who stayed in the city, but again, I chose this picture to show you just a family photo of Trabzon Armenians. You see how Europeanized they were. They had connections with the European countries, and they had Armenian schools, Armenian institutions, of course, and Armenian women, because my research is focused on women. I should say that Armenian women of Trabzon were very well educated. So they would go to Europe, they would go to very well-known European universities. They would graduate and come back to Trabzon. And when the deportation decree was published, Armenian women believed, because they had connections with the foreign diplomats, they were dining and inviting to dine with them, like with, for example, German ambassador or American ambassador or noble Turkish families in the city. They believed that they can somehow prevent the deportation of their families. So, and what they did, they tried to convince these, first the foreigners, and then the Turkish prominent family, female members of those families, to convince their, husbands to not deport them. So, and even they organized demonstrations in front of the houses of those representatives, European representatives that they knew. They invited the German consul's wife to dine with them, convincing her to intervene on behalf of Germans. But of course, these efforts didn't give any fruits, because at the end of the day, they were deported. Another important thing was going on, which we have to keep in mind. There were rumors. Of course, Erzurum Armenians were already deported, and the rumors how they were treated during this deportation was coming to Trabzon. And of course, the families, the Turkish families who were close to these wealthy Armenian families would tell them, would share them that what's going to happen with them during the deportation. So the idea that Armenians were unknown, had no idea what's going to happen to them is false, because they knew what was going to happen to them. So they would do everything in their power, at least to keep some Armenians in the city. And also, the deportation decree was hanging on the wall of the Trabzon. It was in June, and it is if someone was in Trabzon knows that it is the very warm season with humidity and everything, with mosquitoes. And Armenians knew that without transportation they cannot survive that journey to their Mendere, which is the first place that they were going to be deported. And as I've mentioned, the difference between the Trabzon Armenian deportees and others was that from the very beginning, it was clear that they cannot sell their property and they cannot get any means of transportation for the journey. So this is something that is different from, for example, Erzurum. Erzurum Armenians did have an opportunity to sell their property. They had an opportunity to get carriages for their goods, for their transportation, but it wasn't the case for Trabzon Armenians. So from the very beginning, it was clear that this is not going to happen. And of course, after failing to convince to stay in a city, these women and also representatives of Armenian community tried to convince to not deport Armenian women who were pregnant, and of course women and children, these women and also children who could die during this deportation. And in this slide you see Cemal Azmi, who was one of the instigators of Trabzon Armenian genocide. So, and what actually he did after talking to the American representative, the Italian, Austro-Hungarian, and also talking to Armenians, trying to show that yes, he is also concerned about these Armenians, and he makes this kind of a jest for Armenians, saying that parents were allowed, whenever they so desire, to leave girls up to the age of 15 and boys up to the age of 10 in the city. So the Armenians were very happy, oh, this has happened. And who is going to take care of these kids? And also these pregnant women, the Greek metropolitan said, I will take care of these kids. So Armenians had Greeks. They would not trust, even though they had Turkish friends, they would not trust their kids with their Turkish friends, and in the accounts they would say that we were not sure that we will survive, and we didn't want our children to stay in those families because we knew that they would be converted to Islam, so they would prefer to leave their children with Greek families. And also with American missionaries and Americans. And of course, Armenians gave their jewelry and some amount of money to the Greek metropolitan and also to Americans to take care of their kids while they were deported on these deportation routes. And what happened is about 3,000 Armenian children stayed in a city. And some women, again, these pregnant women, but also some women who supposed to take care of these children who stayed in a city. First thing first, when Armenians were deported from the city, what happened, the officer showed up in the doors of the American missionaries, and also they approached the metropolitan and said that you have to give us everything that Armenians gave you according to the money, and of course you have to give us the children that they are like held in the Greek metropolitan in the He is Bishop Christianos. He was the one who was negotiating on behalf of Armenian kids, and he was shocked because he was promised that these Armenian kids will be taken care by him and by Greeks. But he couldn't do anything, so he agreed to give up. So what was done, all these children were put into the Armenian houses, which were emptied by Armenians. They were already deported, all these big houses, and every house had its own mudir, a Turkish officer who would be like a police there. The doors were closed, and these women and children had to endure, had to survive in those houses. Basically, they were cut off the world. And this is one of the women who survived in these houses. This is the account of that woman. I took it from her diary. A few young women like me, with broken hearts, were working day and night to take care of those orphans and provide some food for them, which was not regular and not on time. There were no beds, no children were sleeping on children were sleeping on the floor, but the worst was the situation of newborns who were covered with dirt and constantly attacked by flies and mosquitoes. Those wretched children were crying day and night, and this was unbearable for all of us. So after 2 weeks, this was the situation of these Armenian kids in those households. And what these mudirs did, they came with a solution to transfer these kids into the hospitals, Red Crescent Hospital and Red Cross Hospital. And after some time, all these kids disappeared. And because there were women who were also held in those hospitals, we learned that all these kids were given some poison, and they were drawn into the sea. And many witnessed it, including the international representatives who were in the city. So, what was the meaning of keeping these women behind, or these kids behind? It becomes clear after killing all the children. So what they did, they opened the doors for local Muslims to come and to choose for them wives, or those to adopt, and it was kind of the open doors days. They were open doors days for these houses. And one thing I want you to keep in mind, that it was very class-based, because the prominent Turkish households were friends and knew very well the prominent Armenian families from their class. And I mean, all knew one another. And when it came to choose their victims, or those whom they are going to adopt or to force into the marriage, it was very class-based, if it makes sense. So, and first, of course, the beautiful ones were taken, and then those who refused to go, and they were those who refused to go, they were deported. And we know what happens with those who were deported. They were deported and killed with the rest. This was the destiny of those Armenian women who stayed in a city. They were taken, and I forgot to mention that many Armenian women who refused to marry and who were not deported, they were put into the hospitals of Armenian women victims who stayed in a city. Almost all of them tell the same story. So the second, this was the experience of women who stayed in the city. The second group were the women who were deported. So again, going back to what happened when the deportation law was ordered, Some women resisted, they tried to avoid it. Some prepared for the journey, but they knew they cannot take everything. But the most important part was to at least to take some money with themselves. Okay, they would make these preparations and be deported. The first convoy was deported were the wealthy Armenian families. So overall, 5 convoys were formed from the 16,000 Armenians of Trabzon. 5 convoys. And the first convoy, which was deported on July 1st, were all from wealthy families. So, and all these 5 convoys had completely different destiny, by the way. But all of them lost their men in their Mendere. It is not that far from Trabzon. So after walking a day and a half, men were separated, they were killed, some could escape, and women and children, they gave them a choice, either to convert and to go back to the city or to continue their journey. So most of the women continued their journey, and some of them could reach as far as Mosul, Raqqa, Rasulayn, and Aleppo. But guess what? Only few, it's not even a dozen, like 7 or 8 Armenian women from Trabzon survived. Only few. And it is thanks to a Turkish representative of Aleppo, who knew these families, wealthy Armenian families, who gave the names of these families to another officer to go to Yerzanga, which was a kind of a pre-concentration camp place, to gather Armenians and to rescue them and take them to Aleppo. This is how these women somehow made to Aleppo and then to Istanbul to survive. Most of them ended up in concentration camps, and most of them just shared the destiny of other women from other provinces who were killed. The third group of Armenians of Trabzon, which is very interesting, had completely different experience because they joined their men to resist the deportation law. So it is not a very well known part of Armenian history. When the decree came, the Dashnakhtitun, they were very powerful in Trabzon. So in the beginning, they decided that they will resist. The armed resistance is something that they would do, and they will wait for the Russian army to come and to liberate them. But then they had several meetings with the CUP representatives, and CUP representative convinced them that everything is going to be fine, it's only temporary, and they have to give up their vacants, and those who would not give up their vacants, they will be punished, they will be killed, and so on and so forth. So what 25 Armenian nobles and revolutionary representatives came, have a meeting with the community and said, okay, give up your weapons, it's gonna be only temporary, we have to obey, and we will be back. But after that very meeting, all these men were killed, of course, and only one man named Vartan, who owned this fancy restaurant in Trabzon, survived. He was in the hospital, and he told what happened before he was killed in the hospital, because the CUP representatives, when they learned that this man, Vartan, this restaurant survived, they sent the man to kill him. Before he was killed, he told everyone that you have to do something. And Dashnakhtitun, what they did, they gathered in groups, and they escaped to the mountains, some of them taking their families, and some of them even could cross the sea and go to Batumi. This way they survived. So before Russians came and took Trabzon, these Armenian groups, five of them, about 200 people, survived in the mountains, among them women who had weapons. And what they did, they would hide during the day and they would go into the villages during the night. Now, the interesting network was established between Armenians, their trusted Turkish friends, and Greeks, and of course those who stayed in a city. For example, the American missionaries, they would provide these Greeks and Turkish friends with some money and supplies so that these Armenians could survive in the mountains. But of course they were hunted by Turkish police and Turkish soldiers, so it was constantly like hiding, and some of the groups had no idea that there are other groups as well. And in that environment, when I was reading the testimonies of survivors, you see how women were forced to go to the villages, risk their lives to ask for food. Because if men went there, the most probably they would be killed. But women were the ones who were forced to go and ask for food for survival. So, and this is why I think that the experiences of these women who stayed with these armed groups was different, but it wasn't as good as those who were deported or those who stayed in a city. After the Russian army took Trabzon, Armenians, Caucasian Armenians were among the army, and the Armenians hoped that this is the time to liberate and to find out who survived. Okay? But then Russian representatives said, no, you cannot force anyone to, you cannot use the force to collect your women and children. If Turkish family not willing to give your children, you cannot force them. This is something that shocked Armenians, but this was the strategy, and the Russians would say, we do not want local Muslims to, they became the citizens of Russian Empire, and we have to protect them, you have the equal rights, and you cannot use force. And for Armenians, the second stage started trying to claim their women and children and trying to find them out and convince these Turkish families to willingly give them. So about 200 Armenian women were collected and children. And but of course, when Russians coming, when they took the city, many Muslims flee the city, and they took also Armenian women and children with them. Those who stayed, 200 were claimed, and overall, only 700 Trabzon Armenians survived from 16,000 from the city of Trabzon. And they ended up, as you know, the history of Trabzon, it was taken back by Turks, and Armenians flee again, and they ended up in Russian Empire, and some of them flee, they stayed in the Russian Empire and came to Soviet Armenia, and some of them came to the US. And what we have from Trabzon Armenians collectively is the Hushamadian that we have, like Պատմություն հայկական Բոնդոսի. So I was planning to read 30 pages of my research about this, but I, summarize it, and I want to finish here. I don't want to take much of your time, but I would be happy to answer your questions if you have some. Thank you.
paper going to be is it going to be published and available for us to read it?
Yes. I have published one article about those who stay in a city in a very detailed way, what happened to these women. Yes, and it's part of my dissertation. Hopefully it will be a book and I will publish it and you will read it.
Yeah, I have a personal interest because I have family members that come past, but they were from Trabzon.
Oh, yeah.
But unfortunately, they never wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I hardly know anything what happened except they were targeted by Turkish people and these were my father's uncles were killed and then children. My great grandparents managed to get back to the community. Can't go out into its long story. But one married a Turkish, one had a baby as well. Better off being probably raised.
Can you get closer? I can't hear you.
Well, were they from the city of Trabzon or from the villages, or you don't know?
They lived in Trabzon, but they're originally from Guru.
Okay.
But they also have the other family was in Manchester, England. And they had a business going on between Manchester and Trabzon, which was merchants.
Yes.
So, unfortunately,
You know,
killed.
yeah, they were the plunder of Armenian, the property of Trabzon Armenians. It's very interesting because they were really, really very wealthy, and when the Russian army came, they continued. It's very interesting. They continued the plunder of Armenian wealth of Trabzon. And Armenians would go and negotiate. They would ask them, oh, we have these orphans, we collected these orphans, we have to open this orphanage, we have to do this, to do that. But who cared? They would continue what the Ittihadi started. Yeah.
Is there a list of Armenians that were taken by the Turks, the children that were raised by them? Any record that because he does have Turkish relatives and second, third cousins in Turkey somewhere. So, if there was ever a published list, you could even find it.
There is a published list in this Bazmutun Haygagam Bondosi, and also in the Armenian newspapers of Tiflis and Baku, because especially after 1917, they were publishing, but only the names of those who were rescued. Sometimes I come across with the stories of those who were left behind, and they would say, oh, we couldn't save her or him, but they would leave kind of the message saying that this family held them. You can probably find out through those testimonies also, but I highly recommend to read the Hovagim Hovagimyan's book, but also he has his personal archive at Charents Museum in Yerevan, Museum Archives. It's a wonderful collection, and it has a lot of small notes coming from all Trabzon Armenians saying oh, this is my story, can you include it into the book? Oh, this is how we survived. Because as I mentioned, let's say Trabzon Armenian history, the archives, part of it is in Armenia, in Tiflis, even in Batumi, because of the geography and what happened. And then part of it is in Jerusalem archives. I mean, you can even look into the Dadrian archives when it will be publicly available, because he was working on perpetrators, but you see these perpetrators had their own victims, and Armenians gathered all the names of the victims, who was sold to whom, who was gifted to whom, because many Ittihadis would give these girls as gifts. And we have the list of these, orphans and who was given to whom, because of trials as well. So in the Adrian archive I came across, and Professor Akçam and Adrian, they published a book. You can look into that book. It's mostly trials. And those who came gave their testimonies. It was published in Armenian newspapers. You can read Zhamanak 1919. Like every week there was a report about the trial and who said what, like very detailed. And by the way, Armenian women were not shy to share what happened with them, including sexual violence, because they believed that these perpetrators will be punished. They believed in justice. They really believed. This is why, for example, we have Trabzon trial and Genocide trial. We have all these materials gathered together, and they were Turkish witnesses who would come to the court and testify what they witnessed, what Ittihadis did with their Armenian friends. So it is also, for example, in the Adrian archive, we have this kind of materials. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Anne. I just wanted to ask, add to what you said. Lemos Armenians book, I asked you, ladies and gentlemen, it does talk at the beginning because they were from Trabzon. I think I sent you a copy of his brother's book, and he, my uncle, who was saved by the Greek priest, and was kept until eventually they were no longer able to keep it. So, thank you. I don't know how you survived reading those chapters.
I didn't read you the details because I appreciate you came today, and I don't want to traumatize your afternoon. But what Trabzon Armenian women went through is, regarding to sexual violence, is something like horrific. Like it's being held in the hospital and being raped daily for a year. And they came from a very wealthy families. They were very well educated. They would try to commit suicide. They did everything. This was their story.
I have to tell you that when I was working recently, I shared with you Dadrian's books, some of it that came back to us, duplicates, the Armenian part. They were 1917, 1918. I get involved as you're cataloging, you want to look into the book, and then it was my first time that I was reading in detail. Mm-hmm. I couldn't finish it, 80-page book. I stopped at 40. I couldn't continue anymore. But if we don't talk about it, how would we know about it?
Yeah, but also I want to mention that Armenian women were not passive victims. They resisted it. It is very important. Those who became wives of in Turkish families, they would adopt Armenian orphans. They would take care of them, and at the end of the war, they would, return them, kind of convince them, their husband, to return these kids. They would make lists of those. They were like a small community of women who knew who is in whose family. So they had this interconnection to one another. And it is true about Trabzon as well, because there was this woman, Zavart. She was 16 years old, but she knew what woman, what girl from her class held in which household. She knew. And she would go and work when her brother came to the city with Russian army. She would go find her brother. They would go house to house to save her classmates. She knew. This is very interesting. But they were not passive victims. They also acted kind of to survive and to save their friends and family.
Thank you, Anna. It was very interesting. And I am particularly interested in the role of the American missionaries and the Greek church. I'm curious, once the kids were moved to the hospital and put up for adoption or marriage, did any of like American missionaries or the Greek church attempt to take any of them back, or were they not allowed? Like,
Thank you for this question. No, they were not allowed to intervene. When they were taken, they were taken. They were very smart Greeks who would hide these kids and pretend that these Armenian kids belong to them. Aleksanyan's children were saved that way. They were given to a Greek family, and this Greek family kept them as their own and brought them to Istanbul to return them to her after the war. So Greeks would pretend that these kids, and it was very interesting that the training of these kids to not reveal their Armenianness. It was also a challenge for Greeks because they were also punished to hide Armenians. And Greek metropole, he tried, but all the kids were taken both from the Americans and both from Greeks and Greek metropole because they were gathered. It was very smart kind of a program to gather all of them in one place, for example, in the missionary school building, and then the police came. They removed everyone, and the Armenians already left. So this is the thing. But the way that also they helped by the money that or the food that they could give to those who were hiding in the mountains. They were also risking their lives. I mean, there is a memoir of Armenian who came to the city, a boy, 17 years old Harutun, dressed up like a woman. He came to the city, he approached the American missioner whom he knew, and the missioner was frightened. He was so scared. And then he gave money to this guy. But I mean, they were trying, but they were also afraid. And especially in Trabzon, when most of these crimes took place in front of all of them, like the drowning of Aslanyan, Noemi Aslanyan. She was a prominent Armenian woman, a very well-known. Her husband was very well-known doctor who was killed, and she was killed during the day publicly in front of everyone. Everyone witnessed how she was killed, including the German consul, the Italian. All of them wrote about it. The American, I mean, you open the documents and you read how she was killed during the day in front of everyone.
Very well done. Thank you very much, Anna. I wish you all the best. I wish you more and more research and your book being published. Coincidentally, my two questions were answered already. I was going to ask about the Greek families who fostered many children, but they were given away. They were thrown out of into the street because there was this danger of being punished because of fostering the Armenians.
Yes.
So that was answered. And Zavet Surmenyan, Level Zavet Surmenyan, I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, he was a native of Trabzon, and his memoirs are a very good testimony of what happened in Trabzon. Well, my other question is that you said that you were concentrating on the city of Trabzon, but overall in your research, do you go to like bordering other like Ordu or
Samsun.
Samsun, or do you do that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I do, because when I concentrate on those who were deported, most of them who were deported were also like, they would join those convoys from the villages. This deportees will join the convoys for those who were deported from the city. So somehow they come together at the end of the day, and they're in the way of the concentration camps to Syria. Yeah.
I remember reading about Nargis Shampochian.
Mm-hmm.
Yanko wrote about her ordeal in Urdu, and this is something that shows the traumatic experience and the everlasting impact of the genocide on the Armenian psyche.
Yes.
I thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I thought of something talking about Greeks, because very soon Pontic Greek genocide is going to happen in the same area, right? So, yeah, it's fascinating that the Greek metropolitan was trying to save Armenians and those Greek families. Do you know anything about Armenian orphans deported again during the Pontic Greek genocide, like the deportation orders or killing orders that was targeted the Pontic Greeks in the region? Why I'm asking this is also related to sources, and probably, I mean, you already told about this, I'm pretty sure Professor Akçam already you two talked about this, but I thought maybe there are some sources in Greece too, in the Center for the institute that conducts oral history research and documents the Pontic Greek genocide. We might have some information about Armenians in Trabzon and the genocide. Just thought that might be an interesting connection.
Yeah, very interesting. But the thing is that those Armenian orphans who stayed with Greeks, Greeks returned them. They returned them. When Armenians came with Russian army to the city, most of them returned them. And we do not have any information about those who stayed and the genocide of Pontus Greek took place. I mean, I didn't went there like in my research, but this is very interesting point. Maybe, yeah, something to look into the Greek archives as well. But the Greek metropole, he wrote his memoirs though, which was published in Tehran, in Alik. Very interesting about those days and how he tried to save Armenian orphans. I mean, it was published in, if I'm not mistaken, in 1940s or something. Yeah, very interesting. And also, I mean, not only Greeks, but there were also Georgians who were, there was a Georgian legion, in the region, who were fighting with Turks. And they had some connections with Russian Armenians and some Armenians, so they also saved some Armenians. Yeah.
During your research, did you come across other cities on the Black Sea coast, especially west of Trabzon, that some of this type of thing took place?
I mean, west, my dissertation, but probably not those. I mean, those who were deported, who ended up in the same convoys. I mean, I can check which region joined which convoy, and through that I can tell you what happened with these people, because I reconstructed all the destiny of all these 5 convoys. Some of them were reached as far as Yerzanga, some Agan. So, and you see how different it was, like their experiences during those journeys, and why we can reconstruct it, because every convoy they were sticking together to the point that they reached to concentration camp somewhere and they were forced to live together. I mean, even within the concentration camp, we see the tents of, for example, Garin Armenians next to the Sivas Armenians, next to Trabzon Armenians. So they were like, again, within, even in that environment, within they were living, like trying to keep their communities together. So in that way, I think it's possible to reconstruct and find out.
Thank you, and thank you for your thorough research. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
I guess there are no more questions. Let's give a big hand to Anna. And we do have a light reception, so please come on in.